Okay, so welcome to part 3 of this little animation that we've been making in Blender 2.9. Now this is going to be the part where we do the lighting and the materials and we finish off the little backdrop here, or the environment. And if you haven't already seen part 1 or 2, you can go check the description below, or you can go check out my channel. And I will be making this blend file here available on my Patreon. If anybody's interested in that, you can check the description below. So without wasting any more time, let's get into the materials and lighting. Okay, so before we can get started with our actual materials, we need to add in some lights to the scene and also set up our render settings here. So first of all, we're going to be working in Eevee. So let's come over here to our render settings. Make sure the render engine is set to Eevee. And we're going to come down here, enable ambient occlusion, also bloom, and you also want to come down and enable screen space reflections. And while you're here at screen space reflections, click on the little drop down here and let's make sure to enable refraction, as we're going to be working with some refractive materials like glass in this case. So once you've done those 4 things, what we're going to do is we're going to add in some of our first lights. So we're going to be using area lights. So let's go Shift A. We're going to go down to our lights and add in our first area light. And with our first area light in here, we're going to go G, Z and bring it up. And I'm going to bring mine up to about here. And then I'm going to go to my light settings and we're going to increase the power to 430. And we're going to come here to the size and we're going to make it 5 meters, like that. We're also then going to go Shift D to duplicate the sky and we're going to move it forward along the Y. And we're going to bring the size down to about 3 meters, or around about there. And we're going to rotate it in towards the ship, just like that, maybe even a little bit more steep. And then we're going to go to our top view, orthographic, and we're going to rotate it more to our right and then just move it to the left a little bit. So we want a lamp positioned about there. And with this one, we're going to leave the power the same, but we want to come here to the color and make it a little bit reddish. So let's just quickly hit Z and then go into wireframe to kind of see what the lighting is looking like so far. So far that's okay. But with this top light as well, we might just want to make it a tiny little bit yellowish, almost pinkish yellow, and then just move it up a little bit more. Just like that, and that's looking okay so far. But what we want to do as well is grab this light and then go Shift D, move this guy to the back and then rotate it in towards the ship. And with this guy, we're going to go S and then double Z, so S double X to scale it out along its X. And we're going to rotate it a little bit more differently, so just like this. So it's almost up a little bit like that. And with this one, we're going to increase the power quite a bit. So I'm going to drag it up till we start kind of seeing this nice rim light from the back. And I'm going to make it a little bit less red. And with this one, we want to rotate it facing up a little bit more as well, like that. Okay, so that's looking roughly how I want it. So then I'm going to go to my top view and I'm going to go Shift D to duplicate this guy, bring it over here and then kind of rotate it in. Move it back a little bit. So these are just kind of like 2 rim lights. And this one I'm going to make a little bit bluish like that. So one's a little bit bluish and the one is a little bit more orangey. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this guy and I'm going to go Shift D and just move this guy over here and then rotate it in towards the ship. And this one I'm just going to make also just a tiny little bit more bluer. Like that. So now we have these lights here. We're going to go into our shading workspace and let's just also add in a camera. So let's just add in a quick camera. So I'm going to get myself positioned in the viewport about here. Then I'm going to go Shift A, just add in a quick camera. And with that camera active, we're going to hit 0 to go into camera view. Then you can go G and then hold in your middle mouse button and just pull back to zoom out. And then you can go G, Z and move your camera up. But now we're going to go to our camera settings here. Let's make the focal length 130. And let's go to our output settings and let's make the Y resolution 1920 to give ourselves a square aspect ratio. And at this point, you can kind of rotate and move the camera. So hitting G to move it, and can also double tap R to rotate it. But get something that works for you. So you're going to kind of like zoom around, move it till you get a kind of like a viewport look that looks good. So it's completely up to you. So I'm going to kind of go for a little bit more of a high angle here. so I can see the whole ship. But I also don't want to look too much into the ship here, so I'm going to just rotate it off to the side a bit and bring it in like that. So I'm going to just go with something like this for now, for camera position. And then I'm going to select the floor here and just go S to scale that guy up till I don't see any kind of like, I don't want to see like it not being shown in the camera view here. So we don't want to see the world environment. We kind of want it to be fully enclosed like that. Maybe even just a little bit bigger. So once you've got it there, you can go Control A and just make sure to apply the scale of this plane. We're going to tab into edit mode and then right click and then subdivide. Come down to the subdivisions here and let's make it something like 40 subdivisions, maybe even more. So let's type in 50. And once you've done that, you can tab out of edit mode. And then we're going to give this guy a displacement modifier. Go down to the textures here and go new. And let's just make this something like Verona. Just have a look at that. And let's go to our modifiers again. And on top of that, we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier just to smooth it out a bit. And then we're going to go to object and enable shade smooth. Now you can also come over here and mess around with the strength if it's a little bit too much, but I'm just going to go with something like that for now. So with this plane, we're also just going to go new and create a material for it called ground. And we'll just go to our viewport display over here in the materials and just give it its own viewport display color so we can see the material is applied. So just something like that. So now we pretty much are ready to kind of really get into our materials. So if you hit the Z and you go into rendered view, this is what you should see. And we are in our shading workspace. Let's just drag this guy up a little bit just so we can see our nodes here. And we can also change the lighting a little bit more later. And we also probably want to come to our world settings here and just increase the the value here a little bit more. So with that done, let's start with our first materials. So the first material I'm going to work on are these fins. So I'm going to select the fins. And like you've already seen in part 1, we added in all of the placeholder materials, but we only gave them viewport display. So with this one, let's actually add a real material here. So let's go to the base color here under principle. And I'm going to make mine kind of like a reddish kind of pink. It's a little bit more saturated, but not too saturated. And then I'm going to come here and bring the roughness amount down so it's a little bit more reflective. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to select the rocket. And I'm going to start with the rocket 1 material. And this guy I'm going to make almost the same kind of color, but I'm going to make it a little bit more purplish. And I'm going to bring the value slider down a little bit more for that guy as well. So we have a material that looks like that. Then we're going to go to our rocket 2 material, and this one I'm going to kind of make a little bit more pinkish. Kind of like that, and I'm bringing down the roughness a little bit. Then I'm going to go to the next material, which is the metal. And then we're going to come here to the metallic slider and drag it all the way up to 1. And then drag the roughness value down to about 0.1. Maybe even a little bit more rough, something like that. And now we can also click on the glow material. And what we're going to do is come here to the surface. And we're going to click here on the surface, and let's change this to an emission. So you can see we now have an emission shader instead of a principled shader. And this guy we're going to make a nice blue like this, and then drag the strength up till we get this nice glow happening there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select our little astronaut alien guy here. And the first material we're going to work with is the suit. So let's go to the go up to the suit material here. And let's just make this guy a kind of like a saturated yellowish kind of color. And let's bring that roughness down a bit. And let's also go to the next one, which is the collar. Let's make that one kind of like an orangey kind of color. Bring the roughness down a bit. And then we're going to go to the skin here. I'm just going to make it kind of like a little bit of a blush kind of color. Then we're going to go to the eyes, and let's just make that kind of like a dark brown almost, like that. And then the last one we're going to do, or one of the last ones, is going to be the inner mouth for the astronaut. So let's just make that kind of like a pinkish kind of inner mouth kind of material. Bring the value slider down a little bit. So just something like that. And then we want to click on the glass material here. And what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the surface with the glass selected. And we want to come over down to the settings, and we want to enable screen space reflections. And then we want to make the blend mode alpha hashed and the shadow mode alpha hashed as well. Then what we need to do is come over here to our principled shader, and we want to drag up the transmission value all the way up to 1, and then come up here and bring the roughness value all the way down to 0. But now at the moment it's looking kind of funny, so what we need to do is come here and mess around with the IOR. So let's just kind of slide that down a little bit till we get something that looks like that. So mine is going to be about 0.97. It may be a little bit different for you. And I'm also going to just give this glass here a tiny little bit of a red tinge. Just like that, just a tiny little bit of a red tinge here. And now we're going to select the floor or the ground material here. And what we're going to do is we're going to come here to the base color, and I'm going to make it kind of like a little reddish kind of brown color, almost something that looks a little bit Martian. So this can be totally up to you. So it's just down around this value here. Maybe make it a little bit darker on the value slider here. So just kind of like a little bit of a Martian color. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in a bump node here to kind of give it a little bit of texture to make it look rocky. So what we're going to use is a Verona. So let's go Shift A over here and click on the search. And let's type in Verona. So type in Verona, click on the Verona texture and place it over here. Then we're going to go Shift A, search, and we're going to get a bump node. Select that, and we're going to take the distance here and we're going to plug it into the height of the bump node. And then move this guy over. We're going to go Shift A, search, get a color ramp node, click on the color ramp, and then place it in between the Verona and the bump. This one we'll get to a little bit later. And then we're just going to go Shift A, search, and we're going to get a texture coordinate. So just type in texture coordinate, click on texture coordinate, place it over here, and then we're going to take the object output and plug it into the vector of the Verona. And now what we can do is take the normal here and plug it into the normal of our principled shader. At the moment the scale is not quite right, so what we need to do is come over here to the scale, and let's make it something like 1 for now. Okay, so 1 seems to work. We also want to come to our roughness shader here, slider, and we want to just drag it up a little bit so it's a little bit more rough, not as reflective. And we also want to come here to our strength and just bump it down to 0.3. Or maybe something like 0.5. So that's actually really up to you how much you want. So I'm just going to go with something like that. And that's pretty much our Martian material here. You can also come to this slider here, and you can kind of determine the roughness of these or the intensity of these by sliding these sliders around. Completely up to you. I'm just going to kind of leave it a little bit default almost. So this kind of looks good to me. I'm pretty happy with it. So now we have that done. Yeah, we also want to grab this guy at the bottom here, this funnel, and just give that guy a black material like that, and make it a little bit more metallic maybe, and bring the roughness down a bit. So that's all you have to do with that guy down there. Pretty simple. And so yeah, that's pretty much our material. So let's just edit some of the glow here. So let's just go to our render settings here, drop down the bloom here, and with this kind of bloom that we're getting, we want to come here to the radius and just kind of bring the radius down so it's not flooding out our image. Let's just bring it down a little bit smaller like that. And we can select a rocket here, go to our materials tab, and just make sure you select that glow material. And you can kind of come here and mess around with the color just to you get a kind of blue that works for you. You could even make it green or yellow, but I'm just going to go with kind of like a sci-fi kind of blue. And I'll just experiment a little bit with the brightness settings here. It's really up to you, depends on what you're trying to achieve. You can make it more or less. I'm also just going to tab into edit mode and just select this face at the top that has a glow material and just bring it down a little bit in the camera view till I can see it kind of a little bit more exposed, almost like that. Maybe even a little bit more down. So that looks a lot cooler. I really like the way that looks. So once again, just coming here to the render settings under the bloom, just messing around with the radius. So if it's too much, it just drowns things out. So just something like that. You can also come here to the ambient occlusion and mess around with the distance here to alter your ambient occlusion. Yeah, that's completely up to you to mess around with the factor here and stuff like that till you get a look you like. So you can drag the factor up quite a bit. I wouldn't recommend overdoing it. Something like 1.5 is okay. And then a distance of about 0.8 for the scale seems to work pretty good. As far as the metal here, because we don't have a HDRI, it's kind of looking a little bit weird. So you could come here and just select your metal material on the rocket and just kind of make it a little bit darker. On the value slider here, I think that looks a little bit better. You can even add a little bit of a tinge to it with the colors. Completely up to you what you want to do with the materials. I'm just kind of keeping it really basic for this tutorial. So here we have our little guy here, but I'm gonna grab some of these lamps here, then go into my layout again, and I'm just gonna kind of reposition them and just rotate them till I like the lighting a little bit better. So that's a little bit better. I think like this room lighting is hitting it too much on the side there from the camera view. So I'm gonna move this guy back a little bit like that and see what that looks like. Okay. So this is just a matter of kind of experimenting with things, seeing what works for you, for your little scene. So once you're kind of happy with your lighting and your materials and how things are positioned, you can kind of get into the next stage, which is rendering out a final animation. This guy over here, I might just grab him and scale up the rig just a little bit and see if that kind of works. I hope if it causes any kind of intersection, we might have to leave that. Just having a look here. Okay, so that's probably not going to work. Maybe if I scale him up a bit and I just bring him down. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, okay, that seems to work. So yeah, this has kind of been a really fun little project, and if you're happy with it, we can get into the next part. So if you want to render this out as a final animation, you're going to come here to your output settings, and then you're going to come down to the output. You're going to select a destination folder. In this case, I'll just select my desktop as an example. You're going to come to your file format, and we're going to make it FFmpeg video. Then go down to your encoding, and let's make the container here an MP4. So now all you have to do is go here to render and then render animation, and it'll render this guy out. So this has been a pretty basic tutorial, no fancy animation by any means or fancy modeling. I'm just trying to keep it relatively simple for people who are new to Blender and want to make a final project. But like I said, this project file is available on Patreon, and I'm kind of excited to see what you guys make. So if you do make anything cool with this, share it on Instagram and share people what you made. I really like seeing all the creativity out there. So I hope you guys stay safe, and thank you for your support and watching the content on my channel.